Welcome to the MVFC First Goal podcast. I'm Kelly Burke, and my guest, Lane Grindle, today will be making his Valley football play-by-play debut this weekend. Grindle is better known as one of the Milwaukee Brewers radio broadcasters. He previously spent 10 years at the Husker Sports Network in Nebraska and is a South Dakota alum. Lane, welcome to the show. How are you?
Kelly, I'm doing great. It's a pleasure to be with you, and I'm excited to be a part of the Valley football broadcast this weekend because the Valley kind of runs in my blood. I'm a USD alum, and I grew up as a huge sports fan in Southwest Iowa. So, I mean, I can go back to the days of Kenny Shedd playing wide receiver for UNI. So I'm excited to be able to be around the conference this weekend.
Yeah, we're definitely excited to have you. You just wrapped up your third season with the Brewers. Now that you've had a chance to digest the postseason run to the NLCS Game 7 for a week or so, what were the biggest takeaways from this season?
Well, I think for me, what I enjoy about being around team sports and being able to call sports on the team's behalf, and that's something I've done a lot of my career with, whether it was at Nebraska or at the University of South Dakota before that, and of course now with the Brewers, is you get a chance to be around a group of guys consistently for a pretty good stretch of time, and you see them put in a lot of hard work. You see the culture that they have created within themselves and within their clubhouse or locker room, if you will. And for me, this year was especially rewarding to be around this Brewers team because they had a great culture. These guys worked incredibly hard. They enjoyed coming to the ballpark every day. And I think for me, and I've said this a lot, and I think some people would hear this response and think that it sounds company line or whatever, but it really was true for me. I was really pleased and satisfied to see those guys benefit from everything they had done to put themselves in that position, from whether it was the work or the ability to always stay connected and be on the same page and communicate with one another. It was one of the best teams I've ever been around in terms of that. And they also happened to be really talented as well, a bunch of all-stars on this team. And everybody accepted their roles. It was just neat to see. And so for me, being around team sports for as long as I have, whenever you get a group like that, you realize it's pretty unique and that's pretty special. And that's what I enjoyed the most about it. I love the postseason run. They had a great look to them all postseason where they just believed they were going to win. Came up a little bit short of the World Series, but this is kind of the front part of the window for the Brewers. So I think they're going to be in position to at least contend for the postseason again over the next 4 or 5 years quite a bit. The tough part of it is there's no guarantees in sports. And when you get that close and you don't finish the job, you just hope that's not your only opportunity. You hope that it's going to present itself again. But to win a World Series, to get to a World Series, you got to have a lot of luck. You got to have your guys stay healthy, and that's not always a given. So just to assume that it's going to happen again for the Brewers would be a little bit foolhardy, in my opinion. They're going to have to get back after it again this spring, and hopefully they'll be able to be in position again.
How has your role in the booth and with the team evolved since you joined the club in 2016?
It's evolved a lot and then not so much at the same time. I would say it's evolved in that when I first came in to the Brewers organization, I mean, primarily my job was to replace Bob Uecker when he didn't travel on the road. And those are big shoes to fill. It's a little bit intimidating, to be honest with you. And I had done no Major League Baseball before I came to the Brewers. I had been a college play-by-play guy / sideline reporter for football. And so it was a change. It was different for me. And it took me a good year to really get my feet underneath of me and to feel comfortable and to feel like I had developed a good rapport with Jeff Levering, who I do most of my games with on the Brewers radio network, and a good rapport with Bob. And it took me most of that first year to really get myself comfortable where I felt like, okay, this is my booth too. I'm a part of this thing. And then once I did that, it all just totally started rolling downhill in a very positive direction. Everything became like throwing on a pair of shoes. It became very comfortable. And so that was the big change for me. Not so much my role. My role hasn't changed a lot in the 3 years I've been here. That I do about 70, anywhere from 60 to 80 games a year regular season. And I do about 15 to 20 games during spring training as well, where I'm doing play-by-play. And I contribute in other ways. During the postseason run, Bob was doing the call for most of those games, so I was doing a lot of the room celebration and getting champagne dumped on my head and things of that nature, which was fun too. That was a cool experience for me. So my role has, I would say, in the sense that I've gotten much more comfortable in it, and it feels like home to me now after that first year where you're kind of feeling everything, everything's that new car smell to it, so to speak. So that's probably been the biggest change for me over the 3 years.
You mentioned Bob Uecker, and he's one of the most iconic baseball broadcasters there is, and the intimidation factor of that. But how surreal is it to have him at your disposal and to be working side by side with him in many regards?
I'll tell you, it's really amazing, and I think to listen to him call a game, there are very few people. In fact, there's nobody that's ever called a game like Bob does. It's a very unique call. He does it his way, and it's so entertaining and so good. And he does such a tremendous job of putting you right there in the ballpark with him. It's an incredible talent that he has for calling a baseball game, and he has an incredible love for baseball too. I think sometimes people see Bob Uecker, the guy that was on The Tonight Show, or the guy that's on the movie Major League, or the guy that was on Mr. Belvedere, and they think, hey, this is this really funny guy that happens to call baseball. And I would say it's the opposite. This is a tremendous play-by-play man that loves the game of baseball that happens to be really funny too. And I think that that's how he would want to be remembered as well, from a baseball play-by-play standpoint. Baseball first with him. It always has been. I think it always will be. But I think for me, the biggest moments where I realized, wow, this is really unique. There's nobody else like Bob, and I get a chance to be with him every day, is probably when we're eating dinner before games. When we have night games, we all sit down, we have dinner together. And when Bob launches into story time, and he's telling stories about Mickey Mantle, and I'm not talking about stories that he heard from somebody. These are firsthand accounts where he was there, or Hank Aaron, or any of those types of legendary, iconic people in the game of baseball. It's sometimes hard to wrap your mind around the fact that the guy sitting right next to you was there for those stories. He experienced those things, and now you're hearing a firsthand account of it. It sometimes feels like it's tall tale stuff. To be honest with you, it feels like you're hearing him talk about Paul Bunyan or something, because those guys to me are so untouchable. They were so almost fictional to me. So he brings them to life, and it's a really amazing thing.
I had read that on your interview for this Brewers job that he was the guy that you went to I think lunch with or breakfast with as your final kind of interview phase. And so how nerve-wracking was that?
It was a little nerve-wracking, just because he's Bob Uecker, and he's bigger than life. He's on the Mount Rushmore of broadcasters. And so for me, it was really wild because it all happened fast. When the job first came open, it was late January, and it really wasn't even open yet. It was kind of a preliminary, we think we're going to have an opening, and so we're going to get everybody's resumes now and put in all the work we need to put in to make sure that we're ready to go in case Joe Block, who's now with the Pittsburgh Pirates, does indeed get the Pittsburgh job. And so I applied, not even knowing if the Brewers were going to have this job available. And then Joe Block got the job, and things happened really, really fast after that. I got a phone call. It was on National Signing Day. I was doing a TV show for Nebraska football, actually, on signing day that day, and I got a text, or actually it was an email, asking me to set up a phone interview with the Brewers for the next week. So I did that. Got through that round. Then they decided they wanted to fly me into Milwaukee for an interview, and so flew into Milwaukee and interviewed, and thought that went pretty well. Wasn't sure. And about 4 days later, they called me and said, well, you're in a very good position, but before anything can be official, we have to fly you down to meet with Bob. Well, at that point, Nebraska baseball season was getting ready to start, and I had to leave like the next day for the opening series of Nebraska baseball. They were out in South Carolina playing, I think they opened with College of Charleston, if I remember correctly, in Charleston, South Carolina that weekend. And so we had to go out there and be ready to call those games. So I said, okay, I can fly down and meet with Bob, but I got to do it Monday because I can't back out of this series yet, this late in the game. So I flew from South Carolina to Phoenix pretty much and had breakfast with him the next week. And then when we stood up from the table after about 2 hours of sitting there drinking coffee and getting my first round of Bob Uecker stories in, he shook my hand and basically said, "Welcome to the team. It's going to be great working with you." And it was really a whirlwind. All of that happened over about a 3-week period. And so it was hard to even process what had just happened. 3 days later, I flew my family up to Milwaukee to let my wife see the city because she'd never really been here before, and we started looking for homes. So it was a wild, crazy experience. But sitting down with Bob was certainly the highlight of it. He walked in and sat down, and I knew within about 30 seconds this is going to work out just fine because he made me feel very comfortable. Certainly was a guy that made me understand right away that you're in my tree. You're part of my family when you come work with the Brewers, and I'm going to take care of you. And that's what he's done every step of the way since.
That's awesome. What's the biggest thing that you've learned from him so far?
That's a really good question. I think from Bob, the biggest lesson that I've learned is that it always needs to be baseball first. And I'm talking about it in terms of baseball broadcasting. It's easy when you're doing 162 games and sometimes games get lopsided and it's easy to get off topic and start talking about other things. And that's okay once in a while. It's certainly not, we all do those types of things. There's moments in games in which you're saying, you know what, we need to talk about anything but the game because this game's not very entertaining right now because it's 10-2 in the eighth or whatever it might be. So there are those moments, but everything still needs to be looked at through the glasses of baseball first because you're doing a baseball broadcast. And so I've certainly learned that from Bob. I've learned even more respect than I already did have for the game of baseball through Bob because of how much he really respects the game and loves the game. But I think more than anything, I've also learned to be yourself. And he's the master of that. He never has been anybody but Bob Uecker. And he's done it his way. I mean, Hawk Harrelson just had a book that said, I did it my way. And I think anybody that has followed Hawk Harrelson's career would agree Hawk did it his own way. But that's also what made Hawk great. You know, that's what made Hawk who he is. And Bob, in a similar way, Bob's always been Bob. He's never faked anything. You always get the real thing with him. And I think I've learned that too. And I think that's a really powerful lesson, not just as a broadcaster, but just in life. And I think that's going to be something that's always going to stick with me for a long time.
As we both mentioned, you spent 10 years at the University of Nebraska with the Husker Sports Network. So what went into the decision to transition from college sports to Major League Baseball? And how did you know the timing was right?
Well, I wasn't sure if the timing was right, to be honest with you. I just knew that this opportunity probably wouldn't come around again if I didn't take it when it came and presented itself to me. We had been at Nebraska for about 5 years when the Colorado State job had come open. And it was the play-by-play job. And at that point in time, I was the sideline reporter for Nebraska football. I was doing play-by-play for Nebraska baseball. And that felt like a good, natural move for me to move into the play-by-play chair somewhere. So I applied and got a little ways into the process. And then a great guy who does play-by-play for the Colorado Rockies now, and I've gotten to know really well, Jerry Schemmel, kind of threw his name into the ring at the last second. And naturally, and as they should have, Colorado State hired him at that point to be their play-by-play guy. So that didn't work out, and we were okay. It was fine, moved on from it. And I really didn't look at any other jobs from a college play-by-play standpoint the rest of my time at Nebraska. There were a couple of different opportunities that presented themselves to me, but I didn't think that it was the right fit for my family at the time. So we decided, okay, we're going to stay here. We had both grown up pretty close. My wife's from Sioux City, Iowa. I was from Hastings, Iowa. I grew up a Husker fan. Because I was just across the Missouri River from Omaha, essentially. So Lincoln was kind of home to us in a lot of ways. It was always my goal to be in Lincoln. And so we said, okay, look, this is fine. We have a good situation here. We're going to settle. And we built a house in Lincoln. We built our forever home in Lincoln, thinking, okay, we're going to be here forever. The play-by-play guy at Nebraska is a great friend of mine, Greg Sharp. He's tremendous, and kind of felt like, hey, eventually when Greg retires, maybe then that will be our opportunity at Nebraska. And 2 years into living in our new home, this job presented itself to me, and it just, I don't know how to explain it. It just felt right. It felt like an opportunity that I was never going to get again, and I knew I would regret it if we didn't try it. And it was a little scary to leave what was home for us and the place we envisioned raising our kids. And we have 4 kids, and the community that we've really gotten ingrained in and really loved the Lincoln community. I mean, we didn't leave Lincoln because we were unhappy. We were extremely happy with the way the university treated us, with the way the city was in terms of raising a family. But this was it was Major League Baseball. And there's probably a little voice in the back of my head, to be honest with you, too, that both of my grandpas were huge Major League Baseball fans. That's the first real sports conversation I ever had in my life, where my grandpa's sitting me down and talking to me about Major League Baseball. And some of the best memories I had as a kid was running. I grew up on a farm, and my dad farmed with my grandpa, and they lived about a mile from us. And there was a field that separated my dad's father, his home, and my grandma and grandpa's home, and mine. And so I didn't have a license. I couldn't drive yet. I was a kid, and I would get home from school, and they had one of those old satellites, the ones that rotated around, not like we have now with DirecTV and such. And so that's how I would watch baseball games. I'd have to go over to Grandpa's house, and I would run through the field and then knock on the door. They'd let me in, and they would pop popcorn the old way on the stove, and we would drink RC Cola, and we would listen to the Kansas City Royals on the radio and then watch whatever baseball game we could find on the satellite. And so I just knew how much they would have wanted me to do this too. That wasn't a huge driving force in all of it. The biggest decision was, is this the right thing for my family and I? But that was in the back of my mind a little bit through the process too. Just like, I know if I turned down an opportunity to go work in Major League Baseball, those 2 guys would be a little disappointed in me. They'd want me to see this thing through and see where it led.
Nebraska fans are religious about their sports, whether it's football, even volleyball. There is huge. I'm always so impressed how popular volleyball is and how they sell out those games. Baseball. How did that standard make you a better broadcaster?
I think that's what prepared me for what I do now. I got that question a lot when I was interviewing for the job with the Brewers, because people would say, well, the college game is different than the professional game, and how are you going to handle, big league ballparks and everything else? And I was never worried about that, because the criticism or the scrutiny that you face when you're doing Nebraska athletics on the radio is probably, just shy of what Joe Buck deals with when he's doing games on Fox. It's probably like second to that. I'm joking a little bit, but look, Nebraska fans, they care more than any fan base I've ever been around, in terms of how locked into every little detail they are. And I did a post-game call-in show for my first couple of years at Nebraska after football games, and when they would win by 28, 80% of the calls would be calling in and asking why they didn't win by 35. I mean, they have a high standard that they expect from their team, and that's football. But you're right, volleyball, they sell out every match. Volleyball, they draw very well for baseball. They do extremely well selling out almost every basketball game right now too under Tim Miles, and they draw extremely well for their women's basketball. Nebraska fans love their team. They support their team through thick and thin. They really are not fair weather fans. They're an impressive fan base. And once Twitter came around, you started hearing about every mistake you made. If you said somebody's name wrong or you did something wrong, you heard about it. And so it really it forced you to be a better broadcaster in a lot of ways. I think some guys would take criticism or whatever it might be, and they'd crawl into a shell and maybe not like it. But I took it as a challenge that, hey, okay, these are people that care. This is what this is about. You want passionate fans listening to what you're doing, and this is a chance to step up my game. And that's how I approached it. And I think a lot of other people that have broadcasted not just Nebraska games, but other passionate fan bases across the country they probably have done the same thing. It's a great way to improve and get better at the skill that you love, which is calling games.
It's funny that you bring up Joe Buck, because I have to laugh when people criticize him, because especially these last couple of weeks, The Athletic today just had a great article about his schedule, because he literally every day, whether it was going from Thursday night football to a World Series game or whatever, he was going literally different city, different state, different sport almost every day of the week for about the last 3 weeks. It's hard enough to do a couple games in 1 week, and he's doing basically a game a day, and people have no concept.
That for me is where I defend Joe Buck to anybody and everybody, because I think he's tremendous, number one, and he's got to be to do the events that he does. Look, you don't rise to that point in your career unless you're really good, and I think he's tremendous, but I don't think people understand that you don't just show up, turn a mic on, and call a game. And if you did, you're not going to be very good at it. He puts in an incredible amount of work to get himself ready for all of these broadcasts. He doesn't call a ton of Major League Baseball during the regular season. So just even for me, just to see him show up and do the NLCS and then do the World Series and do it as well as he does, that's incredible to me unto itself. But I got a real good up-close look at that this year when he was doing the NLCS with John Smoltz.
That's
and
right.
We would have a day off. I think we had we played a Friday, Saturday, then we had a Sunday off, and then there was Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday in Los Angeles. And he was calling an NFL game on Sunday. I think he called an NFL game on Thursday. So the 2 days off in that series, he called NFL games.
Yeah.
And then he would still show up. And I'm tired from all of our travel, and he had all this other stuff going on the off day when we're all trying to get our feet back underneath of us. He's a machine, and I think he's tremendous. And that's why I kind of throw his name in there. I mean, he's doing a good job because he doesn't seem to please either fan base. That usually means that you're probably being pretty down the middle and calling it like it is.
Yeah, and not to mention he has 2 twin boys that I think they're under 6 months old right now. So. I mean, that's in and of itself a challenge, just, having twin babies. So
no doubt about it. I can't imagine.
Kevin Kugler, who just worked his first NFL on Fox game yesterday, is a former colleague of yours who's become a really close friend and a mentor to you. How has he shaped your career?
More than anybody that I know. He's my best friend, and I'm so tremendously proud of him, first and foremost, and what he's been able to go on and do in his career. I met him in the summer of 2002. I interned for him when he was hosting a talk show in Omaha, Nebraska on 1620 The Zone. He was doing Nebraska-Omaha football, which is no more. That program doesn't exist anymore. So he was doing Division II football and Division II basketball. And we hit it off. We got along really well. I came back the next couple of summers and helped out at the radio station while I was still in college. And we became very, very close. And our friendship has evolved over the years to where I talk to him pretty much every day on the phone. It's kind of crazy. My wife sometimes, I think, feels like she shares me with Kevin because of the amount of time that we spend on the phone. And I think his wife, Michelle, would say the same thing. But our families have gotten really, really close. And he's just a tremendous man. He's a great father. He's a great husband. He's a great friend. And that all comes first and foremost. But then he's been a really good influence on me. I think if you listen to my call, you probably hear a lot of Kevin. I hear people tell me all the time that they hear a lot of Kevin in my call. Brian Anderson, who does TV for us with the Brewers, that was one of the first things he said to me. I get Matt Vasgersian a lot. Which is totally on accident. I think I just happen to sound a little bit like Matt Vasgersian. But Kevin is probably not by accident. I've listened to him so much over the course of my lifetime, and I've tried to model a lot of what I do after how he does it because he's been the example for me. And so there's probably some similarities. I'm certainly not as accomplished as he is, and I hope that someday I will be. But he's taught me so much about preparation, how to get yourself ready for a broadcast, how to work with a color analyst maybe you don't know as well, to make sure everybody's comfortable how to keep a balanced broadcast, work with your producer and your director, all those different things, especially over the last couple of years where I've started doing a little bit more television. He's been a huge resource for me that I can lean on in that regard because he's doing so much television now. But he's been great for me. He's helped me really in every job that I've gotten. He's had a hand in it in some way. When I got the job at Nebraska, he sent my tape off to Jim Rose at the time, who was the play-by-play guy at Nebraska, and said, you guys should give this guy a listen. Then when I got the job with the Brewers, Kevin reached out to Jeff Lovering and said, hey, we're both on the Big Ten Network. We're colleagues. I'm telling you, this is a guy you guys should give some consideration to. So he had a hand in helping me there. He was the first person to call me to tell me that this Brewers job was open. He'd seen it, and he thought it was perfect for me. So he's been an incredible influence on my life. He's going to be my best friend probably the rest of my life, and I'm really lucky to have him part of it.
It's fantastic. My conversation with Lane Grindle continues in just a second, but if you're enjoying this edition of the MVFC First and Goal podcast, check out all the Lineup Media Group offerings, sports and non-sports podcasts. Now back to the show. Lane, what do you feel like makes a great play-by-play broadcaster?
Well, for me, I get this question a lot, and my answer is probably boring, but I put it in two. I have two main points, and that might seem simple, but I think if you keep it simple, then it can be effective. Number one, I want to be clear, coherent. I want people to know what's going on, and that's even more important when you're on radio. Obviously, on television, you have pictures that can accompany your words. So in some ways with television, it changes a little bit where you want to tell a good story. You want to make sure that you're hitting on the key storylines and the key moments of the game and some of the background behind those things. But from a radio standpoint, I want to make sure everybody knows where the ball is, what the score is, everything that they need to know, the fundamentals of the game, so to speak. And then the second part is, and this kind of, again, from a television standpoint, weaves into number one, is I want to make sure that we're entertaining. I want to be entertaining. I want people to be excited when there's big plays that happen. I want my voice to reflect that. I want to paint that picture. I want to narrate that moment for everybody. But I also want to make sure that if something significant is happening, the audience understands why it's significant. And I think sometimes those things can get lost in broadcast. It's not always as easy as it sounds, but those are some of my main goals when I go into a broadcast.
Yeah. You alluded to the preparation and the process that's involved with that. So let's examine, this week, we're getting ready for Western Illinois at Southern Illinois in Valley football. So what will your preparation look like all through this week leading up to the game?
So it really already started. For me, I started putting my charts together last week based off last week's two deeps for both teams. And I have most of that pretty much compiled. Now I'll get the game notes here later today and tomorrow, and then I'll start using and pulling things from that I can add to my charts on. And so then those will get filled in the rest of the way over the next 24 to 48 hours. Then I'll take those off and I'll get them printed and have those pretty much ready to go. So that part's kind of straightforward, to be honest with you. That's, I think, probably what most play-by-play guys go through. I might have had a little head start on the charts this week because I didn't have a game last week, where other guys were getting done with their game on Saturday and maybe taking Sunday to decompress, and then they dive in on Monday. But that's the first part of it. And then the second part of it is I just try to find any type of nuggets and interesting tidbits that I can, whether it's reading newspaper articles, listening to your podcast has been helpful already this week, Kelly, listening to some of your podcast with Jared Elliott from back in spring ball. I've already listened to that today and found, a lot of interesting things that help you kind of get some background on all of it. And so that'll be kind of something that I'll do over the next couple of days. But also I'll watch film over the next 2 or 3 days as well. Plenty of it, in fact, to get familiar with the personnel and to get my mind and eyes kind of in a routine with both teams, where when I see a number, I don't need to look down at my chart, hopefully. When I see the number, I know who that is, and that way everything just becomes a little bit more smooth. So almost like getting some practice reps in, to be honest with you. And by Thursday afternoon, I think I'll feel pretty confident that we're ready to roll. We'll have our production call, of course, on Thursday, and that'll fill in the final blanks for me. But I think by that point, I'll be ready for game time.
Yeah. You have several Valley football ties, Joe Gantz at Youngstown State, and then obviously Jeff Colhane, who's the voice of NDSU. And you guys go way back. I believe you worked together in Yankton, South Dakota, and then obviously again at the Husker Sports Network. But how do two guys who were working essentially in small town South Dakota rise to the level that you are both at now?
I think we pushed each other in a lot of ways. Jeff's uncle, Kevin Colhane, hired me while I was still in college, and I was working part-time at the radio station for him, and then he just kept giving me more and more responsibilities, and pretty soon I launched my own talk show. And Jeff was graduating college. I had already graduated, and Kevin had given me a full-time job, and he said, how would you feel about hiring my nephew and bringing him on as your co-host, and he can work some of the games with you? And I said, that's great. I'd love to have another young, energetic, career-driven guy alongside me. I think that would be really fun. And we connected right away. We knew each other a little bit, but we connected right away. And we had a great time. We only hosted our show together for 4 months because I got the Nebraska job shortly after Jeff started full-time. So we really only worked one fall together, but we became really close friends really, really quick. And we've stayed in touch ever since. And then, of course, I had the opportunity to bring him down to Nebraska about maybe a year and a half after I left for Nebraska. We had a need. We needed somebody that we could really trust and that knew what they were doing. And I knew Jeff was the guy. And so we brought him on board. And so then, of course, we got even closer. And now he's one of my great friends to this day. Again, I've talked to him twice today already on different topics. One was we were talking some Valley football, but then we were checking in on each other on some personal stuff. He came up and visited this summer and went to a Brewers game and hung out. So he's a great friend, but I think we pushed each other. I really do. I think we made each other better all along the way. We continue to do that. We listen to each other's broadcasts and we critique each other. We tell each other when we think the other one's, maybe not calling a particular part of their game the way they should, or, hey, have you thought about doing it this way? And we trust each other, so we know the other one has the other one's best intentions. So it works, and he's made me a better broadcaster. Joe Gantz is a guy that I know from our days at Nebraska, and he came up and visited me in Pittsburgh last summer when we were playing the Pirates. He's on the Youngstown State staff now with Bo, and of course I go back a long ways with Bo as well, and actually have a great relationship with Bo. He's been very, very good to me over the course of my career. So I have a lot of connections throughout the Valley. Like I said, I grew up as a kid. I read the newspaper every day. The sports section was our way of getting our news, right? I didn't have cable back then, and I didn't have the internet when I was a little kid, so I read the sports section. I read about the Northern Iowa game every single Sunday morning to see, what Terry Allen's team had done the day before or whatever it might have been. And of course, South Dakota State was our big rival when we were at USD. And John Stiglmeyer is a guy that I got to know during my time doing talk radio in Yankton, South Dakota. And I don't know if there's anybody in college football that I have more respect for than John Stiglmeyer. So I do. I have a lot of connections to the league, and that's one of the reasons why I'm so excited to be able to call a game this weekend for the Valley.
Yeah, Coach Stig is definitely one of the nicest guys out there. And I'm glad you brought up Bo, too, because I think he gets this reputation sometimes of being really intense, which he can be, but he's a super nice guy. I have had the same experience with him. I've found him, he's really easy to talk to before games, and obviously he gets in that game mindset, so it's a little different when you're talking to him at halftime, but I found him to be very, very, very nice.
Bo's great. He was a guy that I got along with really, really well during my time at Nebraska. And I always got a lot of questions about it because from the outside, the perception is that's got to be a tough relationship. And it really wasn't.
No, yeah.
It was one of the best coach broadcaster relationships I've ever had. We could be very honest with each other. But I think he knew where my loyalties were, and I knew that he had my back at the same time. And so it just worked really well. And everybody else on our broadcast team would have said the same thing about Bo. I have a great Bo Pelini story that's actually quite funny. You know how he's intense, and so sometimes the halftime interviews are a little bit short.
Oh yeah,
and he might not go into a ton of detail.
I had one of those this year, actually.
and that happens, right? So my first year with Bo, his first year in 2008, the halftime interviews, even if it was going well, were kind of short and there wasn't a ton of meat in them. And so we had a conversation like, if you could just give us a little more. It doesn't have to be a lot, but, we're trying to kind of give you some fairly easy questions that we're teeing up for you. If you could just give us a little more, that would be great. And he said, okay, yeah, no, I will do my best. And so the very next game after that was Oklahoma, and that was the Sam Bradford team that scored 100 points on everybody. And I think Oklahoma had 50 points at half, if I remember right. It did not go well. And so I'm waiting for him to come out after halftime, and I'm thinking, what am I going to ask him? And I think the question I came up with, and I knew this was a one-question halftime interview, the question I came up with was something along the lines of, Coach, it's pretty lopsided. What'd you say to your team to make sure that you get the effort you need from them here in this second half? And he turned to me and he said, I told them that we have to play much better football here in this second half. And then he walked off and he went about 10 yards and he turned around and he looked at me and he gave me a thumbs up, like, better? And I said, thumbs up, Coach. You were great. And I've joked around with him about that since that day. It was kind of fun. But no, he was always really good to me, and he had a lot of good success at Nebraska too. And I know he's not having the year he wants to have this year at Youngstown State, but he's had a lot of success there too. And I know that he's happy to be in his hometown as well in Youngstown.
Yeah. I'm supposed to ask you about your first football broadcast with Jeff in 2005 when South Dakota was playing Minnesota Crookston, and specifically how long you drove for on the way home after a night game on Thursday.
Well, so Jeff and I back then, we were doing high school football, we were doing the Coyotes, we were doing everything. I mean, we were driving all over the state of South Dakota to broadcast, and it was fun. I mean, we had a great time with it. But we had a high school football game, if I remember correctly, or at least Jeff did, I think. I don't know that I did. I think Jeff had a high school football game the night before USD opened the season against Minnesota Crookston. So we decided that he was going to do that game. Then he would pick me up in Vermilion. He was living in Yankton at the time. He was going to pick me up in Vermilion, and we were going to drive all the way up to Crookston, Minnesota, which is east of Grand Forks, essentially. And we were going to get there in time to do our talk show. We had an afternoon talk show that went from like 2 to 6 in the afternoon. And so we left at like 5 a.m. I don't even remember. And Jeff wanted to drive on the way up because he was doing color and I was doing sideline. And he wanted me to quiz him on his charts, essentially, to make sure that he had his charts down. So we did that all the way up there. We got there. We did our talk show. And then we had a 70 to like 10 game. USD won it. And then on the way home, I think I got us outside of Crookston. I don't even think I had us back to Grand Forks yet. And it started raining. I was really tired. And I said, you know what, Jeff, I'm pretty tired. You might need to drive the rest of the way. And he goes, are you kidding me? And I said, you're the new guy. Go ahead and saddle up, partner. And so he drove the rest of the way home. He drove all the way up there, and he drove outside of about 5 miles. He drove all the way home as well. We got home it was like 3:30 in the morning. I know we stopped in Watertown, South Dakota at one point, but that's a story we tell every time we get together. That story gets brought up. There's a lot more to it.
Yeah.
That it would take us an hour to tell every single thing that happened during that road trip. But the meat of it is that he drove 99% of the way up and back in one day to Crookston from Vermilion, from Yankton, South Dakota in his case.
That's hilarious. You're a South Dakota alum, as you've said, and ran track for the Coyotes. How did your experience of Vermilion as a student athlete and also as a broadcaster on some of the Coyote broadcasts get you ready for this career?
You know, it did in a lot of ways. One is being an athlete. It was important, I think, for me that I had that experience at USD. I always tell people I wouldn't change anything about my path to get where I got to. I know that some people will look at, Syracuse as this manufacturing plant of broadcasters across the country, and it is for a reason. It's tremendous, and guys learn so much, and they come out of there with great experience. But for me to be at USD, to do what I was able to do there, which was get a ton of hands-on work with the radio station, compete in Division II athletics because they were Division II at the time, and make the friendships that I did. It all happened for a reason, and it all helped form me to be the guy that I am today. The competition part of it was very humbling for me, to be honest with you, at USD. I came into USD as a sprinter that had lost a handful of races in my entire high school career, thinking it was going to be that way still, and found out very soon that it was going to take everything I had just to even be an average runner on that team, just to be a role player, if you will, if there is such a thing, on a college track team. And I learned that the hard way my first year. I had injuries and had to kind of battle through those, ended up redshirting, and then got healthy finally. My sophomore year, was starting to make some big strides towards the end of my sophomore year, got hurt again. And the reasons I got hurt were, I think, in a lot of ways, because I had to train so hard. I had to strain myself so much just to be in a position to be competitive. It was a humbling experience, but it also, I think, continued to instill hard work ethic in me. And I knew that if I was going to do it, I wanted to do it right. And I had a great coach. Dave Gottslavin was a tremendous man, and just a tremendous coach, and really a good person that I still talk to on occasion. Not a lot, but we stay in touch. And I felt like I learned a lot about life from him, maybe more about life than I did about track in a lot of ways. So that was great. And then his willingness to let me start working at the radio station, knowing that that's what I was going to do eventually in my career, and working the schedule around that so I could keep running. My junior year, I ran track and I worked at the radio station, and that was hard. I was doing a talk show and running track. It was really, really hard to do, but Coach Gottslavin made sure that he found a way to make it work for me. And then my senior year, I knew I needed to focus on the radio stuff because I was getting bigger assignments. I was doing Coyote football. I was doing Coyote women's basketball. And it just probably wasn't going to work at that point to try to continue to run track. And I knew what was going to eventually pay the bills for me. But it was fun. Vermilion is a small community, but it's a really fun community. They really support their Coyotes. They love that team. And I haven't been back there in about 4 years now. And so I haven't seen the new facilities, and I can't wait to get back. I'm going to hopefully get back at some point this offseason to see it again, because that city and that campus has changed significantly since I was there.
Yeah, the new facilities are really nice. The weight room and the training room and the basketball court, it's really impressive.
Yeah, I can't wait to see it all. I know how much they needed it. That was an important thing for them to get that done and get that passed through. And I'm really happy for everybody there. For David Herbster, who's one of the good guys in college athletics. And I think he has a good coaching staff there underneath of him too. And I'm happy for them that everything's worked out the way that it has.
How do you balance the rigors of baseball season, the travel, the long hours at times, with not only being a husband, but being a father to 4 young kids?
This is where I'm going to give the Brewers a ton of credit. They are, I've been blown away, and this has been my first experience in Major League Baseball, but I've been blown away with how much they get your family involved over the course of this season. They've been great since day one, whether it's family trips where you get to bring your family on the road in the middle of the summer on a trip, whether it's getting them down to the ballpark and coming into the booth and saying hi for a little bit. They really do a nice job. And so we've really taken it as when baseball season hits, it's baseball season for all of us. Yeah, Daddy's working a lot more and he's traveling a lot more. But when Dad's home, we're all going to the ballpark as much as we can. And we're doing this thing together, and it's worked really well. My wife is an absolute rock star. She's amazing, and her ability to balance pretty much a full-time job working at our school at our parish where our kids go to school. And then at the same time, running the kids around to activities, because we're at that age now. We have 10, 8, 4, and 3. And the 10 and the 8-year-old have a million things going on, and the 4 and 3-year-old have a lot more than I ever did going on at 4 and 3. And she gets them to all their activities and gets them all in bed at night, and it's really amazing how she's able to do it. But it's hard. I mean, it's not always easy. There are stretches during the season where you're ready for that day off, and you're ready to kind of just decompress and hang out with your kids. But we find our ways to make it work. When we're playing in Chicago, a lot of times they'll make the trip down to Chicago and spend a couple of days with Dad as well. They came on the road with me to Minneapolis this year for a weekend. And so that's kind of the best way to make it work. Spring training's tough. It's 6 weeks where I'm gone. And they come down for about 10 days in the middle of it to break it up. And that's maybe our favorite 10 days of the year as a family, because I have quite a few days off over the course of a spring training. So we have plenty of days where we get to go do some stuff. But it's not always easy. It takes a great other half, and I have that. And then it takes finding ways to be creative to make sure that everybody gets to be involved. And you know that it works pretty well when after Game 7 of the NLCS, my 10-year-old was crying. She was beside herself. And just today, somebody brought up Valentine's Day, and her mother said, well, I'm not looking forward to Valentine's Day because that means spring training starts, and that means Daddy's gone for 6 weeks. And my 10-year-old said, I miss Dad, but I'm ready for baseball to be back already. So they enjoy it. They really love it, and it's a good experience.
That's great. Your bio says proud to be a Catholic father and husband. What role does faith play in your life?
It's a very central role. I think that for me, I was baptized Lutheran, I was confirmed Methodist, and then I think like a lot of people in college, I didn't really go to church a lot. I went to church here and there, but I wasn't overly disciplined in how I practiced my faith. And then I met my wife, Allie, and I saw her, and she was Catholic, and she went to Mass every Sunday. She never missed, and she's a great person. She makes me a better person. And so before we even got engaged, I said, I want to become a Catholic. I want to have that in my life. And so I started going through RCIA, and her dad is deacon in the Catholic Church, so he actually was my teacher, which was kind of cool. And then shortly thereafter, I proposed to her, and we got married. But really loved getting more involved in my faith, and it informs a lot of things of what I do on a daily basis. I'm certainly not perfect. I practice my faith for a reason, because I need the work. But the goal is to be better today than you were yesterday. That's kind of my little mission statement in life. I fail at it sometimes, but I think that if you can achieve that more often than you don't, then you're hopefully on the right path.
Lane, is there anything I haven't asked you that you feel like is important for people to know?
No, I think you've been all over it, Kelly. I'm looking forward to working with you this weekend. This is going to be a lot of fun. And I'm looking forward to getting back to kind of my roots in a lot of ways with Valley football. It's going to be a lot of fun. And I think these are two fun, exciting teams. Western Illinois is playing great football. They got a chance to get into the playoffs. And Southern Illinois is coming off their best performance of the year as well. So I appreciate it. You were all over it. You did your homework.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I'm looking forward to working with you and visiting more in the car ride down to Carbondale. So we'll see you soon.
Can't wait. Thanks, Kelly.
If you like what you heard from Lane Grindle on our MVFC First and Goal podcast, please do us a favor and share, subscribe, and leave a review. LineUpMedia.fm also is home to many other sports podcasts, shows like Bleacher Bums, 11th Inning Stretch, and Performance Nation. You can also find us on iTunes and Stitcher.